Have you ever been in an argument you just had to win? You know, that feeling when you really need to persuade someone to see things your way? Well, the ancient Greeks didn't just get that feeling, they turned it into an art form, a science, and honestly, a critical survival skill. So let's dive into the powerful world of Greek rhetoric. I want you to picture this for a second. You're living in ancient Athens. There are no lawyers like we have today. So if someone accuses you of a crime, you, and only you, have to stand up in court and defend yourself. If you want to change a law or convince the city to go to war, you have to get up and speak to the public assembly. Your future, your family's safety, your freedom, it could all come down to how well you deliver a single speech. And this powerful skill had a name, rhetoric. It comes from the Greek word rhetor, which just means speaker. But you know, it was so much more than just talking. It was a whole system for building an argument that could win over an audience, hitting them in both the head and the heart. And this gets us to a huge central question that the Greeks argued about endlessly, and one we're still grappling with today. Is this whole art of persuasion a noble way to search for the truth, or is it just a clever trick to win no matter what's right or wrong? That's the big debate we're going to unpack. So, first things first, let's look at how words became so incredibly powerful in ancient Athens. You have to understand, rhetoric was basically the engine of Athenian democracy. Everything ran on public debate. Political power wasn't just about money or status. It was about who could command the language. If you were a persuasive speaker, you had real influence. If you weren't, you were basically at the mercy of those who were. Seriously, the fate of a person or the entire city-state could be decided by one really good speech. Now, when a skill is that important, you can probably guess what happens next. A market for it opens up. And sure enough, the first professional teachers arrived on the scene. They were called the Sophists. So who were these guys? The Sophists were basically these traveling experts, kind of like high-priced consultants, who taught the art of winning an argument for cash. Their name comes from the Greek word sophos, which means wise. They saw a need in this new democracy, and they filled it, teaching people how to be persuasive speakers. And this famous quote from Protagoras, one of the leading sophists, really gets to the core of their entire philosophy. Man is the measure of all things. Now, that might not sound crazy to us, but back then, it was a bombshell. It challenged the whole idea of a single God-given absolute truth. Instead, it suggested that truth is relative. It's shaped by our own individual perceptions. And that belief changed everything about how they taught. For the Sophists, if there's no single truth with a capital T, then what really matters is making the strongest, most convincing case. They taught that any issue has at least two sides, and a skilled speaker could argue for either one. So for them, the goal wasn't to discover some universal truth, it was to win. It was to persuade your audience that your version of reality was the right one. Okay, so how did they actually do it? What was their method? Let's take a look at the toolkit they gave their students for building that perfect, winning speech. It was a really systematic 5-step process. First step, invention. That's where you find all your arguments, appealing to logic, emotion, and your own credibility. Next, arrangement, where you put it all together in a logical structure. Then style, choosing just the right words to make an impact. Fourth was memory. Yep, you had to memorize the whole thing. And finally, delivery, actually performing the speech with a powerful voice and gestures. It was a complete recipe for persuasion. But as you can imagine, not everyone was a fan of this win-at-all-costs system. In fact, this whole approach led to a massive philosophical showdown with one of the greatest thinkers in all of history, Plato. And here was the heart of the problem, the big accusation that stuck. Critics, led by the philosopher Plato, basically accused the Sophists of a really serious ethical crime, teaching people how to make a weak or wrong argument sound like the right one. They believed the Sophists were just selling a tool for personal gain, completely ignoring things like truth, morality, and justice. Plato really hammered this point home in his famous dialogue, The Gorgias. In it, his character Socrates just keeps asking again and again, what is rhetoric really for? What is it actually about? He just wasn't buying the answer that its only purpose was to persuade people. And this chart really lays out the fundamental conflict. On one side, you've got the sophist way. For them, the goal is persuasion. It's about creating belief, even if the audience doesn't fully understand the issue. It teaches you how to win. But for Plato, philosophy was the complete opposite. The goal was truth. It was about creating real knowledge and understanding. It teaches you to search for what is right, not just to win an argument. So Plato's final verdict was pretty harsh. He concluded that the kind of rhetoric the sophists were teaching was a seriously dangerous skill. He basically called it a cheap trick, a form of flattery that could be used for incredible evil because it was completely disconnected from any sense of right and wrong. Now, I know this might all sound like some dusty, ancient debate, but this exact conflict, persuasion versus truth, is arguably more relevant today than it has ever been. I mean, just think about it for a second. We see this tension everywhere. In political campaigns that are all about emotional sound bites instead of facts. In a courtroom drama where the slickest lawyer wins, not necessarily the one on the side of justice. In every single ad trying to convince us we need something. And of course, all over social media, where a persuasive, catchy post can go viral whether it's true or not. And that leaves us right back where we started, with the same critical question the Greeks wrestled with over 2,000 years ago. In this world, where we are just flooded with information and arguments coming at us from all sides, how do we tell the difference? How do we know if we're just being convinced by a clever trick or if we're actually hearing the truth?